Hello, this is The Briefing. I'm Samantha Simmons. Our top stories. President Trump tries to calm fears over the spread of the coronavirus, telling the American people the risk remains very low. Meanwhile, international efforts to contain the coronavirus outbreak intensify as more new cases are recorded outside China than inside. 5 people are killed in a shooting at a brewing company in the US city of Milwaukee. The gunman was reportedly a disgruntled former employee. And we'll tell you why a team in Moscow has created a perfume that smells of the terror associated with Joseph Stalin's firing squads. Also in business, change in store, but is New York ready for life without plastic bags? Hello, very warm welcome to the programme, briefing you on all you need to know in global news, business and sport. As ever, we'd love for you to be part of the conversation. As coronavirus spreads globally with a surge in cases right around the world, today we're asking, is the virus affecting your travel plans for leisure or for business? Tell us what you think. Just use the hashtag BBC The Briefing. So, Donald Trump has appointed Vice President Mike Pence to lead the American response to the coronavirus emergency. Both men claimed in a White House news conference that the risk to the American people is very low. President Trump said he would work with Congress to secure whatever funding is needed. He also confirmed that 15 people in the US have been diagnosed with the virus and that all but one has made a good recovery. Chris Buckler reports from Washington.
Your gown goes on first.
In New York, hospitals are finalising action plans and resources are being put in place, just in case. America is having to prepare for the potential impact of the coronavirus spreading in this country. And a president who seemed initially dismissive of the dangers is now doing everything he can to show that he and his advisers are taking the threat of an outbreak seriously.
They've said it could be worse, and I've said it could be worse too. I also think, no, I don't think it's inevitable. I don't think it's inevitable. I think that we're doing a really good job in terms of maintaining borders, in terms of letting people in terms of checking people.
Mr. Trump has appointed his Vice President, Mike Pence, to oversee his administration's response to COVID-19. Yet just hours before on Twitter, the president appeared to suggest others were scaremongering, tweeting that the American news networks were doing everything possible to make the coronavirus look as bad as possible, including panicking the stock markets. There have been some falls on Wall Street, and anything that damages the economy in an election year is a big worry for a president. But earlier in Congress, Democrats had claimed that Mr. Trump had shown more concern for share prices than the public's health.
He's trying to calm a public that we see in China, panic can be as big of an enemy as virus in these situations. And so there is always that balance.
Mr. Secretary, I don't want to panic over this either. The stock market's crashing. He's trying to stop a stock market. He's not trying. He's outright contradicting everything that you all have just said. Outright contradiction.
At airports and elsewhere in America, face masks are becoming a more common sight. And President Trump has signalled that more travellers from a growing number of countries are likely to face screening and greater restrictions. Chris Buckler, BBC News, Washington.
Well, elsewhere, the US and South Korea have agreed to delay joint military drills because of the outbreak. Seoul has confirmed 334 new cases, bringing the total number in South Korea to almost 1,600. Let's go live now to our correspondent Jenny Hill, who's in Tokyo. Jenny, first of all, bring us up to date on what's happening in South Korea.
Well, the country continues to be the source of considerable alarm here in the region because the number of cases is still soaring. You mentioned there that those annual military exercises involving the combined US and South Korean forces have been called off. That's because a number of South Korean soldiers have tested positive, but also yesterday so did a US member of serving staff. So those games, war games, have now been postponed. The number of cases is continuing to soar there, more than half of them linked to a religious sect in the country, and the authorities are now in their thousands trying to get through tests of all 200,000 members of that religious sect. Interesting, the picture is very mixed here in the region. In China, people are still dying, they're still becoming infected, but the numbers are starting to fall, whereas here in Japan, the number of new infections is continuing to rise. Many of those infections, well over 800, are linked to the Diamond Princess cruise ship, which is still moored up in the port of Yokohama. But what's concerning the authorities are the 175 new cases here in clusters all over the country. And of particular concern is the case of a woman who tested positive, was treated, and then was discharged from hospital at the beginning of February, only now to be retested and confirmed positive for the virus. The first case of its kind, the authorities say, in the country.
And we see people behind you, Jenny, walking around the streets with those face masks on. A lot of concern in the country, which of course is due to hold the Olympics this summer. What are the thoughts with regards to that now that the virus is spreading globally?
Well, you're right. I mean, concern here is growing as the number of cases increases, and they are steadily creeping up here in Japan. The authorities are saying, look, the Olympics are 5 months away. You can see banners in the streets all saying Tokyo 2020. They are adamant that it's far too soon to make any kind of decision and that preparations will continue. But we have heard from the chief executive of the Tokyo Olympics organising committee, who has said that the torch relay, which is due to begin in just a few weeks' time and travel all the way through the country, may have to be downsized. They're now considering their options there.
OK, Jenny Hill in Tokyo for now. Thank you. Well, don't forget, you'll find plenty more coverage of the outbreak on our website, including this live page, which is being updated throughout the day with all of the key information that you need. That's at bbc.com/news. Or, of course, you can download the BBC News app. Well, let's brief you on some of the other stories making the news. India's Prime Minister has called for calm as at least 27 people have been killed in sectarian clashes in Delhi. The violence first broke out between people for and against the controversial new citizenship law. Muslim residents have been fleeing their homes and businesses. Police have fired tear gas and rubber bullets at protesters on the Greek island of Lesbos over plans to build new migrant camps. Dozens of people, including protesters and police officers, were injured. The Greek Prime Minister has called for calm. The US House of Representatives has approved legislation that would make lynching a federal hate crime after more than a century of failed attempts. The Senate passed a similar bill last year. Once the two bills are reconciled, they will be sent to President Trump to be signed into law. The Spanish government has agreed to hold monthly talks with the separatist administration in Catalonia to discuss its demands for independence. Spanish opposition parties have described that as a humiliation. The UK government will publish its strategy for post-Brexit trade talks later as it prepares for formal negotiations with the EU to begin. Brussels has already set out what it wants from the talks: tariff-free trade, but keeping EU rules on state aid, workers' rights and other issues. Five people have been killed in Milwaukee by a gunman who opened fire at the headquarters of a brewery before apparently killing himself. Local media in the US said the gunman was a former employee of the Molson Coors Brewing Company who had been sacked. Freya Cole reports.
Armed and ready, the Milwaukee Sheriff Department prepares its tactical response after a mass shooting at a local institution. A 51-year-old man, still dressed in his work uniform, went on a rampage through the Molson Coors campus, killing 5 of his former colleagues before turning the gun on himself.
There were 5 individuals who went to work today, just like everybody goes to work. And they thought they were going to go to work, finish their day, and return to their families. They didn't. And tragically, they never will.
Known locally as the Old Miller Brewery, it is home to at least 1,000 workers. When the shooting started in the afternoon, they were told to stay indoors. Many remained in lockdown late into the night, while police secured the grounds and carried out a thorough investigation. Once the scene had been secured, local officials gathered to address the media. They each paid a solemn tribute to the victims and their loved ones. But the press conference didn't escape an urgent call for reform on America's Second Amendment.
We're here on the scene of another American tragedy, another senseless American tragedy, one that shouldn't have to happen. And unfortunately, it's in our backyard. And I hate to say that it's in our backyard once again. This is the 11th mass shooting in our state since 2004. But I also want to issue a call, a challenge, because we shouldn't accept this. This is not the way that things should be. And we should never grow comfortable in the face of these repeated tragedies all across America.
Police stressed that their investigations have only just begun and made a vow to rally around a community forced to come to terms with yet another senseless tragedy. Freya Cole, BBC News.
Now, stock markets have been falling in Asia on continued worries about the spread of the coronavirus. Microsoft has become the latest major company to scrap its forecasts because of disruption to its business, following announcements from Apple and drinks giant Diageo. Well, Jeremy Thompson-Cook is from Complete Currency Consulting and joins me now. Welcome to you. Good morning.
Hello.
Good to see you as ever. So we've seen $3 trillion wiped off global stock markets. Yeah. This is over pandemic fears. But why now, when this virus has been in the headlines for weeks?
We in financial markets can be very, very guilty of being very complacent at times. We saw it in 2007, 2008 with the mortgage crisis, the housing crisis, which turned into the global financial crisis. And originally, when people started talking about coronavirus or COVID-19, it was a Wuhan problem, and then it was a Hubei problem, and then it was a China problem, and then it's just an Asia problem. And now, given the state of the contagion, probably in Italy, that was the real marker that sent markets really, really much lower. Everyone starts to think, wow, if it's jumping all over the world, we can't really contain it. And that's the one thing that markets like is control, and we've lost control.
President Trump, very concerned about this, trying to calm fears. Didn't really work, did it?
No, I don't think he's the best spokesperson to calm fears. He, certainly from a stock market point of view, there hasn't been too much of a reaction to his statements, because the people you should be listening to, the CDC, the Centre for Disease Control, have put their hands up and say we don't know how this is going to metastasize over the course of the next coming days, weeks, and months. And the fear is that supply chains, businesses are just not able to trade because goods can't flow across borders. People aren't going to go to shops anytime soon. We're not going to see delivery. The logistics side of things also slows down. So everything contracts and freezes up.
And how much of a concern is there about how this is going to hit the global economy, not just the markets, but ordinary people?
Yeah, ordinary people as well, because if you're, businesses, for example, may be happy for people to work from home for a couple of days, a couple of weeks, for example, if there's a quarantine procedure that's needed. But in more, we're services based here in the UK. But if you're manufacturing based, like in Germany, for example, then how can you build a car from home? So we're going to see businesses start to falter, and smaller businesses that may supply the larger names may not be able to pay wages because they simply can't bring in any profit.
Jeremy, we'll be talking plenty more about this in the papers a little later. Thank you. Do stay with us here on BBC News. Still to come, we will tell you how the recent stormy weather has been putting the landing skills of even the most experienced pilots to the test.
Prince Charles has chosen his bride. The Prince proposed to Lady Diana Spencer 3 weeks ago. She accepted, she says, without hesitation.
As revolutions go, this had its fair share of bullets. A climax in the night outside the gates of Mr. Marcus's sanctuary, Malacanang, the name itself symbolising one of the cruelest regimes of modern Asia.
The world's first clone has been produced of an adult mammal. Scientists in Scotland have produced a sheep called Dolly using a cell from another sheep.
Warren Beatty and Faye Dunaway announced to the world that the winner of Best Film was La La Land. The only trouble was, it wasn't. The mistake was only put right in the middle of gushing speeches by the team behind the modern musical.
Not for 20 years have locusts been seen in such numbers in this part of Africa. Some of the swarms have been 10 miles long.
This is the last time the public will see this Pope. Very soon, for the sake of the credibility and authority of the next Pope, Benedict XVI will, in his own words, be hidden from the world for the rest of his life.
Welcome back. You're watching The Briefing. Our headlines. President Trump has been trying to calm fears over the spread of the coronavirus, telling the American people the risk remains very low. 5 people have been killed in a shooting in a brewery company in the US city of Milwaukee. The gunman was reportedly a disgruntled former employee. Now, how would you like a perfume that smelt of terror? Not particularly appealing, I guess, but a team in Moscow has created just that in a campaign to prevent a perfume store being opened in the building where thousands of people were condemned to death under Joseph Stalin. The scent is meant to capture the smell of the former military court, which tried political enemies of the Soviet regime in the 1930s. Campaigners want the building turned into a museum, not an elite boutique. From Moscow, Sarah Rainsford reports.
Notes of blood and smell of metal and smell of smoke.
If you could only smell what Alyona's mixing. She doesn't want people to enjoy it, though. This is the scent of terror. It's meant to evoke the mass political purges under Joseph Stalin. Alyona's own great-grandfather was executed then as an enemy of the people.
He was arrested in 1937. He had 3 children and a wife. I think in every Russian family there is such story.
So the scent is a protest. This place hosted show trials in Stalin's time. A businessman now wants to turn it into a perfume boutique.
It was called the Shooting House. Yes.
In the 1930s, more than 30,000 innocent people were condemned to death here by firing squads.
We created a very luxury or glam box with a very scaring stuff inside.
Can I have a smell?
You're welcome. It's creepy, isn't it?
Yeah.
We want people to look how absurd it is to open a glam boutique in the building where people were shot dead.
Activists want a museum at the spot, like this one.
There's hundreds of thousands of these bullet casings here, each one of them to represent a victim of Stalin's Great Terror. And these are the faces of the victims, those people who were sentenced to death by firing squad at the house on Nikolskaya Street.
The execution list for that shooting house was signed by Stalin himself. And yet he's increasingly seen as a positive force here, a war hero.
Today, Russia is forgetting Stalin's crimes. It's a scum in our history, and we should look on it and say honestly that it was wrong. We don't want it to happen again.
For Alexei, it's personal. He never knew his father.
My father was sentenced to be shot in 1938 in this building.
When I ask what he thinks about opening a perfume shop here, he tells me the idea is outrageous, like dancing at Auschwitz. The building's owner has been avoiding us, lying low. But the scent of this protest is inescapable, created to linger and make you think. Sarah Rainsford, BBC News, Moscow.
Well, here's our briefing on some of the key events happening later on. A judgment is expected at the Court of Appeal in London over the controversial expansion of Heathrow Airport. The Vatican's apostolic archives will be penned to the press, which the Vatican says will prove Pope Pius XII was committed to saving Jews during the Holocaust. And this year's Berlin International Film Festival continues. It's now in its 70th year. Now it's time to get all the latest from the BBC Sports Centre.
Hello, I'm Katie Shanahan and this is your Thursday Sport Briefing. We'll start with football as Lyon have stunned Juventus